It is the worst start for Manchester United in the top flight in 33 years. However, Mark Ogden just told me that year they went on to win the league. So there we are. Get your money on United to beat Liverpool at the top of the table come the end of the season. They were, of course, once again so poor against Manchester City. This is what Amorim had to say. I won't change my philosophy. If the United hierarchy, want it changed, you change the man. I'm not going to change my philosophy. I will play my way until I want to change. Mark Ogden joins us now. Oggy, it's funny because I was thinking, what can I ask you that I haven't asked you before about United? And I feel we've got nothing left. We've scraped the bottom of the barrel. Every week we're here talking about United, talking about their frailties, talking about where they've gone wrong. And yet again, we're sat here having that same conversation.
It's exactly what I feel like when I've got to ask Ruben Amorim a question at a press conference. You know, Ruben, are you going to change the way you play? It's not working, and the answer's the same every time. But I think that's what it boils down to. You can talk about the players not being good enough, but maybe some of them are better than they're showing right now. But what I got from that game was that the players just have no faith in the system. They're very confused. And yes, I mean, I know that United are tonight briefing that Amorim is safe for now. There's no plans at the moment to change him, but that will only last for so long because it clearly isn't working. Is it 8 wins in 31 league games? I mean, it's not relegation form, but it's not far off. So Man United have missed out on European football this season. They can't keep missing out on the Champions League because they'll just keep falling further and further behind. Because every time a club qualifies for the Champions League, they can guarantee between 80 and 100 million pounds. So those clubs that are in it are pulling further away from United. So Amorim is basically, he's on the clock now. He needs to get some results. They got Chelsea at home at the weekend. They got Brentford away the following week. But as he kept telling us last season, if United not in Europe this season, he's got a week to work between games on the training pitch. Is that making them better or making them worse? We'll soon find out.
The least flexible. I've said this before, and it's a bit like this conversation where you're thinking, what can we ask Mark that's different? What can we discuss that's different? And I repeat, he's the least flexible manager managing at elite level. Maybe that's ever managed in the game. Certainly in recent years. Every single manager tinkers a little bit, makes some subtle changes if need be. If need be. And if you're doing the same thing week in, week out, twice a week, and getting the same results, and yet you keep going back to the well, and it's just, you know, you're pulling up the same result. It's just absolutely bonkers. On top of that, he is right. You know, the Agatis of this world, and there are others, they have just been absolutely hopeless. But you have to figure a way how, right, if Casemiro hasn't got the legs to get around, and Agati's been hopeless, and Bruno Fernandes, I really want to get him a bit further forward. When you have a weak midfield like that, you cannot have 3 attacking players. You cannot. When your midfield is weak and your defence is suspect, but particularly in the midfield, you can't have Acuna, who didn't play, you can't have Ahmad and Mbeumo in front of that midfield. You can only have, I'm afraid, when you're as poor as they are, you can only have one, because you need to have an extra body in the middle of the park. Now, as a defensive player, or certainly a more natural central midfielder, that's what a normal manager would do. He would stem that flow until such time that he could go back to this. Do you know what I'm saying? If I'm in the midfield, if I'm playing, and we had this at Celtic at one point, Paul Lambert and myself. We had Lubo Moravcik and Ayo Berkovic, who you know from West Ham. 2 super talented players playing behind the striker. But if you put if you put the old band on them to measure their kilometres after the game, it's probably about half the rest.
Right.
And we used to get horsed when we played the better teams. We were okay against the weaker opposition. But when we went out and played in Europe at Lyon and other teams like that, we got a toasting in the middle of the park. And that's what's happening at Man United. They have a weak midfield, but it's weakened even more by having Bruno Fernandes playing deeper and having 2 attacking players. And trust me, this is all on Ruben Amorim. Because he knows this, but yet he continues in this stubborn attitude of doing the same thing. I honestly think he's a couple of games away from A, the players throwing him under the bus with all these leaks, because we know it's going to happen, or B, Ineos having to give him a single ticket back to Portugal because he's out his depth.
Do you think he cares?
He should.
I feel like at a stage where he's like, I'm not changing, sack me if you want. Please, get me out of here.
To that point, I think he should. And while it might have worked in Portugal and he had success with it, including in Champions League, now it's a bigger stage and it's a bigger ask. And now you're truly being tested and as a manager and a test that he's simply failing. And now, to Craig's point, he's not the first manager that says, I'm going to stick to my guns regardless, but it's never ended well. The most recent that comes to mind is Postecoglou. And we see how that finished with him. And albeit, at least he was true to his word in winning silverware in his second season. Now, Ruben Amorim kind of has rolled out this line, or this defence of his inflexibility since he's arrived. Now, it's one thing, you arrive in October, November, whatever it is, you have a January transfer window, but then you have a summer transfer window, and Manchester United spent.
And you have summer training as well, because he always said, I didn't have time.
And you have summer training, as to your point. Now you're truly being judged on how good a manager you are. It was easy to excuse or accept when it wasn't your team. You didn't have the pieces. You've had the opportunity now to build a squad around the way you play, the way that you insist on playing. You've had the opportunity to work with these players around the way you insist on playing. And now to have a worse start to the season than Ten Hag did, and we saw how that ended up for him, I think he's asking for a lot of trouble.
I think Postecoglou is a good example because, and we'll see how he gets on at Forest, but I have concerns about him trying to change the Forest way of playing, which has been successful for them, being stubborn, and they're going to be too open and get dragged down towards a relegation dogfight. This kind of start we're seeing here is just unacceptable as a Manchester United manager or any other manager of an elite level club. But it goes back to Shaq's point. What was good for the Goose in Japan, in the J League, and in Scotland at Celtic and the Scottish Premiership is not good necessarily in England, in the Premier League, where the teams are better, the teams are faster, the teams are stronger, and when you cough the ball up, they punish you. When you're coughing the ball up in Japan, with all respect, and you're coughing the ball up in Scotland against Hearts and Hibs, and Motherwell, the chances are you're going to get away with it. 8 times out of 10. What happened with Postecoglou was teams figured it out. They were happy for Spurs to go gung-ho, and when they coughed it up, they got punished. And he refused to change. And he's sacked. And he feels he shouldn't have been sacked in his comments lately from his press conference, but he was sacked. And he was rightly sacked for finishing because his league form was terrible. This guy's on the same boat. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I think he's a couple of wins, a couple of defeats away from Ineos having to say goodbye. And that's just another embarrassment after another embarrassment, particularly with the way they dealt. And I've said this before. At this moment in time, they are not running the football side of it any better than the Glazers. Right? And we can talk about taking dividends out and running the club in debt. That's not my scenario. They are not running the football department any better at the moment, even with these new appointments, than the Glazers. And the Eric Ten Hag situation and how they crumbled after winning the FA Cup was a total embarrassment for them. And I think and Oggy might correct me on this, but I think they're sitting there with their eyes closed behind the sofa, just hoping that this guy can somehow get the results, because then so they don't have to do what they did before and admit they've made another mistake.
Yeah, and how long do those people keep making it? Like Omar Barada, how long does he have left, Mark? How many lifelines does he have?
Well, to Craig's point there, the one person that is hiding behind the sofa with his hands in his head in his hands is Omar Barada, because he was hired from Man City 18 months ago with a big fanfare that this guy, Chief Operating Officer at City, is ready to run a big club like Man United. He comes in and his first big decision is to appoint Ruben Amorim. He was the guy who drove that decision to appoint Amorim. That pretty much led to Dan Ashworth's departure, because Dan Ashworth didn't really impress Jim Ratcliffe with his suggestions of people like Gareth Southgate, Marco Silva, Graham Potter. I mean, you have to say that was a list that wasn't particularly inspiring either. But Omar Barada pushed really hard to get Amorim. Now, my question to Barada, if he was going to answer the question, is that when you hired Ruben Amorim, what was your due diligence? Did you speak to the guy who was 39 at the time, no experience of a major league in Europe? Were you going to say to him, look, this is a major club, a massive club that's in a real bad situation right now. How are you going to do it? And he's going to come and say, well, I'm going to play 3-4-3 no matter what. And if that's the question that Omar Barada asked, and that's the answer he got, and he still appointed him, well, what does that say about Omar Barada? So did Omar Barada ask the right questions of Ruben Amorim? Did he decide that, well, if it doesn't go well, they'll change it anyway? Because we have to remember, 6 months prior to that, Liverpool looked at Ruben Amorim and they really considered him after Xabi Alonso pulled out of the running. And they decided that to hire Ruben Amorim would be too much of a risk and too expensive because it would have cost them around £200 million just to bring in the players that would have fitted his system at Liverpool. So they went for Arne Slot. So Omar Barada has a lot to answer for now. Now, I'm not saying he's going to lose his job if Amorim loses his job, but this was his big decision. He went for the guy that he thought was a rising star in European coaching, but he didn't realise that the guy won't change his system. And if the system doesn't change, then the results aren't going to get any better. So Barada has a lot to answer for.
Say we're in a situation, yeah? 2 or 3 weeks down the line, he loses the next couple of matches. Oliver Glasner comes in. You know, someone who has done well at Crystal Palace, established, wants to make that step up. Can he do anything with this squad of players that he's inheriting? Or do we then have to wait for another transfer window for him to come in, to bring in his players? And we're almost in this vicious circle, I feel.
No, because if you're savvy enough and you're good enough, and don't forget he was successful in Germany, Oliver Glasner. If you're good enough to go into one of the most threadbare squads in the Premier League, in Crystal Palace, and achieve the results he's achieved, both in the league and with the Community Shield, but more so the FA Cup, with those resources, then you can get more out of this United squad than what Ruben Amorim is.
Right.
Absolutely. There's no doubt for me. Now, you know, you're going to hire a manager and all of a sudden they're back in the top 4 and, you know, they're back amongst it? No, because it still will have to be a process and it will still be expensive. But I think he's already shown more than enough that he can work with a squad that's far from perfect.
But this team is turgid. Look at that.
Yeah, but you got to go in. No, you know, Mazraoui's an international footballer.
Well, yeah, just because you're an international footballer.
Well, they're all international footballers. But I just want to ask you one thing, Oggy. There's been some reports today floating around that the players are losing faith. We've heard this before. Players are losing faith in Amorim, some of them, and they're about to throw him under the bus. We've seen that before. Any truth in that?
Listen, I've not heard directly that players are losing faith, but I've heard it from second-hand sources that they are. But that is an easy assumption to make. But you only had to watch the team yesterday to realise that the players are playing, and they look confused. You know, they look like they're playing out of position. Patrick Dorgu doesn't look comfortable on his position on the left-hand side. He just doesn't. And I think that Bruno Fernandes is another one that looks out of place. So the body language they're giving off is that they're not happy with the system. I've not heard directly that they are unhappy about it. And you know what footballers are like. Any excuse they can have, they will find it and they'll moan about the system. They'll moan about being confused. But listen, if it's not working, then the players have every right to say, coach, we need to change this because it simply isn't working for us. And there's been so many bad results now. Like I said, 8 wins in 31 in the Premier League for Man United is abysmal. And there was a list of teams that they've beaten during that time. And I think, apart from Everton early last season, I think all the teams he's beaten were either relegated or promoted. So, I mean, it's not a great look, is it? They haven't really got much of a list of... I mean, I think Aston Villa in the final game of the season, but apart from that, they've had a terrible run of results. And the teams they've beaten are teams that they really, really should beat. They're not beating anybody else.
What I don't get is, right, if you watch Portugal play in the international break, Bruno Fernandes plays further forward. We just saw his graphic there and how it's more difficult for him to be creative from a deeper position. You watch him playing for Portugal, he has the PSG pair who are excellent, Vitinha and João Neves, behind him. But he's further forward in a position where he can affect the game. It's where he should be. So, in that sense, when you already know you have a player to play behind, you're buying Benjamin Sesko. He's not been brilliant, I get that. But you're buying a striker. You have Bruno Fernandes behind him. But you go out and buy Mbeumo and Cunha when you already have Fernandes to play in that position, and you know you need to replenish the central midfield position with a more defensive midfielder or two. Now, I know they were talking about Believer, and all that. But they really need 2 in there. So it says to me about recruitment. I've gone out and bought 2 players for a position that my club captain and best creator really wants to play. And I've left a gaping hole in the position that he's going to have to go back and play because I'm spending money elsewhere. None of it makes any sense. They needed 2 solid midfielders to be able to allow Fernandes to get further forward and buy Acuna, and buy both of them, but stick one of them on the bench. It just makes absolutely no sense. And he's in there playing deeper in central midfield, a position in a defensive aspect that's a little foreign to him, with 2 players, one that can't run and Casemiro anymore, and the other who's hopeless, and Agati. So you tell me how that is going to bring you success. It is absolutely bonkers.